Hello, welcome back to Mrs. Tori's YouTube channel. Today we are going to continue talking about complete the square, but instead of the leading coefficient being 1, it's going to be greater than 1. So let's look at an example. 3n squared minus 6n minus 42 equals 0. We are going to move the 42 first. Remember, we want constants on one side, our variables on the other. So then we've got 3n squared minus 6n equals 42. Now, nothing new so far, right? Now, we need to do something to this equation so n squared has a coefficient of 1. Well, think about it. If I gave you the equation 3n equals 10, what would you do to solve for n? Well, you would divide both sides by 3, right? Same thing here. To get the n squared by itself with just a 1 in front of it, we're going to divide everything by 3. So when we do that, we'll get n squared minus 2n equals 14. We just divided all of these by 3. Now we complete the square like we normally would. So our b is -2. So -2 divided by 2, or half of -2 squared. I'm going to simplify that to -1 squared. Instead of squaring it, I'm just going to leave it just like this, and we're going to add it to both sides. So we're going to rewrite the left side. N squared minus 2n plus -1 squared equals, on the right side, we can just add here. So 14 plus -1 squared, that's going to be 1, so 15. Now, what we've done is we've created a perfect square trinomial. So this will factor into n minus 1 squared. That's why I just left this as -1 squared. And of course, that's going to equal 15. Now it's an equation we know how to solve. Take the square root of both sides. N minus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 15. To get n by itself, we're going to add 1 to both sides. So n equals 1 plus or minus the square root of 15. And that is our final answer. So really, the only difference is we've got to divide the whole equation by our leading coefficient. It's the only change from yesterday's lesson. All right, let's look at one more example. How about 9n squared plus 7n plus 23 equals 0. So let's move the 23, so we'll have 9n squared plus 7n equals -23. You can really move this before or after, as long as the constants are on one side and their variables on the other. Now, just like up here, how we divided everything by our leading coefficient, we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to divide everything by 9. You'll notice this one won't work out as nicely as this one did when we divide it. But nothing changes. We'll just have to work with a few fractions. So 9 divided by 9 gives me n squared. 7 divided by 9, we can't divide it and we can't reduce it, so we're just going to leave it as 7/9 n equals, we also can't divide 23 by 9, so we'll just leave that as -23/9. Now that we have a leading coefficient of 1, we're going to do the exact same strategy. We're going to take this b, find half of it, and square it. So half of 7/9, that just means multiply by half, right? Multiplying by half and dividing by 2 are the same exact thing. And then we square that. Whenever you're working with fractions, it is totally okay to use your calculator. Let me get a calculator that does fractions. So, if you do second y equals, we'll take 1/2 times alpha y equals 7/9. And that gives us 7/18. If you can do it without the calculator, that's awesome. If not, use your calculator. So we'll get 7/18 squared. Let's just leave it like this because we know when we factor it, this will be our number. So we're going to add 7/18 squared to both sides. So on the left side, we're just going to rewrite it. N squared plus 7/9 n plus 7/18 squared equals, now on this side, we're just going to add. You need to be very careful when we add it. Again, we can just use our calculators. So we need alpha y equals -23/9 plus, let's put this in parentheses, 7/18 squared. So this is this in our calculator. We get -779/324. Now that is simplified, so that's as far as we can simplify it. -779/324. Now, the reason we left this as 7/18 squared is because we know when we factor it, it's going to be n plus 7/18, all of that squared, equals -779/324. Now, we don't want to turn this into a decimal because if we would, -779 divided by 324, it would be this huge, long, non-repeating decimal. It's an irrational number, so we just want to keep it as the fraction so we can get an exact answer, not a rounded answer. So now we have an equation we know how to solve. Take the square root of both sides, so we'll get n plus 7/18 equals. Now, when I rewrite this side, let's simplify some things. So because we have a negative under the square root, we're going to take an I out. And then I'm just going to split the square root between numerator and denominator. So I root 779 over the square root of 324. Now we have some big numbers, so let's double check and see if we have any perfect squares. So the square root of 779 gives us a big long decimal, so we can't simplify that one. What about the square root of 324? Ooh, it's 18. So we've got n plus 7/18 equals I. Let's see if we can simplify 779. So we can just try dividing. So 779 divided by 9. How about 10? How about 19? Oop, 19 and 41. Those are both prime numbers, so we have no pairs, so we actually can't simplify this. So we're just going to leave it as the square root of 779. Remember, the square root of 324 was 18. And then our last step to get n by itself, we'll just subtract 7/18 from both sides. Then we'll have n equals -7/18. Oops, what's one thing I forgot? My plus or minus here. I have a bad habit of forgetting that. So -7/18 plus or minus I root 779 over 18. So you can leave it like this, or since we have a common denominator here, we can just combine our numerators. So n equals -7 plus or minus I root 779, all of that over 18. So either of these answers are correct. They both have two of our answers because we have plus or minus in either one. We could do this because we have a common denominator. if say this denominator over here was 10 or something, then we would just have to leave it like this. But because they're the same, we can combine them. All right, see you in my next video.